What's good, everybody? Welcome to Origin Story, the podcast where we interview creators about where they came from to understand how they got here. My name's Phillip Russell, and I'm with my co-host,
Ben Thorp.
And today we're talking to Nick Guérin, the creative director and writer of Thunder Lotus Games' most recent project, Spiritfarer, which is described as a cozy management sim about dying. And this was really interesting.
Yeah, this is a great interview, and I think we should say, this is an indie title, but I think it got a lot of, or maybe a medium amount of press when it came out because of just like its very unique premise, which is that you've got a sim where you're helping kind of take the souls of these characters to death and help them kind of leave life. It's a really interesting concept. So it's basically a farm sim, like a Stardew Valley kind of type. You take over for Guérin in this job of kind of charting souls to their final resting place. And so along the way, you're doing a lot of these kind of farm sim activities where you're kind of planting a garden or you're cooking meals and basically taking care of these souls and trying to make them as kind of satisfied as they can be before they kind of get to their last kind of resting place and leave. Yeah,
and I think one of the really fascinating things that sets it apart from a lot of other kind of bigger name games in the industry is that it presents this topic about death and grief and mourning, all this heavy subject matter in a really positive, warm, and light point of view. That's not to say that it doesn't, grapple with really heavy themes and a narrative that will, affect a lot of people, but it just presents death in a positive way and isn't afraid of, really digging deep into that topic of what it means to grieve, what it means to mourn, and what it means to pass over, and how we care for people. And that's something that Nick, I think, does a phenomenal job of really articulating throughout the interview.
Yeah. And I think, we were both really impressed. He was talking about how he did some of the prep for thinking about this. And so both from the studio perspective, they were having conversations amongst kind of coworkers, talking about death, talking about kind of the people that were important to them in their lives that they lost, how that impacted them, and how that kind of bleeds into the game. And he was also kind of describing how he prepped for some of this by going to visit hospitals. And it sounds like kind of seeing people in and around hospice care and talking to people in those situations about how they were thinking about or preparing for death. And so I don't know. I mean, it was just like I think a very surprising, but also like a very interesting way of engaging with that.
Yeah, it was a really elucidating moment in the conversation. And, I think one of the points of this podcast from the get-go was to demystify a lot of these roles, whether it be in the games industry or another industry. And I think with something like a creative director, we talked to Greg Kasavin already about what his role was like. Nick does a good job of showing us another avenue where creative direction could go and kind of seeing the behind the scenes of like, how do you kind of conceptualize a game around caring for people who are dying. And he does a good job of tying that through line together with how the mechanics are developed in order to make the player feel like one would if they were caring for somebody who's dying. And a lot of what he talks about is, the importance of the mundane, or like what some may consider these boring kinds of points in life, and how including those moments, allowing for these quieter moments can give us these payoffs that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So he just did a really good job of justifying the mechanics and kind of showing the thought process for how they came to them. Yeah,
and I think just a really good, he kind of talked about the balance between those things where it's like, all right, well, how do we make a game that is, marketable to some degree, but also engages with things that are difficult, and also has a gameplay loop that is, is going to make you feel, put you in this kind of caretaker role in some ways, where it isn't always kind of immediate gratification. It can be frustrating in some ways. It was a really interesting way of thinking about coming at creating a game.
Yeah, so we're really excited for you all to listen to this interview, and we really appreciate just the honesty and transparency that Nick brings to this conversation. So we hope that you enjoy it, and let's not keep them waiting.
Let's get to it. Nick Guérin is a creative director for Thunder Lotus Games and wrote Spiritfarer, which has been described as a cozy management sim about dying. Nick's other work includes design work on several Assassin's Creed games, including Origins and Syndicate, as well as design work for Watch Dogs 2. Spiritfarer has been nominated for Games for Impact and Best Indie Game at the Game Awards 2020. It's also a finalist for the Nebula Award for Best Game Writing. Nick, thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
So happy to join you guys. Thanks for having me today.
I think we kind of just wanted to start by asking, what inspired the concept for Spiritfarer, because it's a very unique game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a question everyone is curious about, which makes sense because it sounds like a very weird thing to start with the idea of having a cozy management game about dying. Actually, it's not my idea at all. I joined the company and the pitch was already there. And in a nutshell, the pitch was the myth of Charon in the Greek mythology, so that very grim, dark figure on the Styx River having to ferry the souls of the dead through the underworld, the Greek underworld. And that concept was used in contrast to, I'd say, the whole world of Studio Ghibli's Hayao Miyazaki's movies. So a bit more colorful, dreamy, that idea of a metaphorical concept. But I guess the whole premise was that contrast idea of having that dark, gloomy figure being juxtaposed with a world that was way more bubbly and colorful. And that was about it, actually. It was more of a thought experiment than anything else, which was interesting because when I joined the company, I was like, wow, that's completely weird and deep up. And then I think I can do something with this. Most probably.
Based on your previous work, and we'll get into that in a bit, what kind of drew you to the project then? What stood out to you about Spiritfarer and Thunder Lotus in general that made you want to join in?
Right, so I think first to me the appeal was for the company before the project. They were looking for someone to take on the creative director's role. That role was before me assumed by Will Dubé, who is the actual company CEO and the co-founder of the company. And I was at that point. My career was in AAA since the beginning. I was at EA when I started, as you said, and then Ubisoft for quite many years, working on big AAA projects. I mean, don't get me wrong, Assassin's Creed games are absolutely awesome, and they are most probably the in Montreal one of the best franchises you can work on. The teams are great. They were absolutely made with stellar individual in many regards. But that being said, only in Montreal, they were made by teams of around 300, 400 people. Worldwide, so globally, we would count around 1,000 developers in a project like that. So you do quite many things, but on a very small fraction of them. Even when you're in a directing role, you still have to share and understand the vision that is actually represented and carried by a very vast number of individuals. And at any rate, I think when you're in a very large company such as Ubisoft, you have to also deal with the fact that you have to have a very large number of players to seduce. You have to make a game that will sell millions and millions because you have to. They are so expensive that you have to have a model that allows you to sell a very high number of copies. So when I heard Will talk about the position at Thunder Lotus, was like, it sounds like something way more smaller, way simpler. I guess when you're game designing and when it's something you want to do since your childhood, as I was, the idea of owning a concept entirely, of dabbling in many areas of the concept, from writing to game design to level design to creative direction to, in many ways, marketing and all this type of stuff, was pretty much interesting. I mean, it was probably, from a holistic point of view, the most interesting thing I could be doing. And also, from a, I'd say career perspective, it made sense to me. I mean, I had been following Thunder Lotus for a long while, since they released Jotun, their first game. And, in comparison to Assassin's Creed, I mean, Assassin's Creed, I'd say, wants to make games that are grounded in history. That was always the motto, that history is our playground. That's what we say all the time. And I don't know if you guys played Jotun, and I hope many of your listeners will have played the game, but it's a game that is humble yet extremely ambitious. Everything they tried to do it, with being extremely genuine, being honest. The game is said in Icelandic. It's been, approached the Scandinavian Northern mythology from a very, true perspective, and that was seducing to me. Those guys, they know what they're doing, in my opinion. That's what I thought. So yeah, it was a natural fit, to be honest.
Yeah, and then I think, just thinking about Spiritfarer as a project, I'm really fascinated by what I'd call like this death positivity that it brings into the realm of games, which, death is kind of like a pillar in the games industry, but usually we're the player is the one, causing the death in a lot of senses. I'm curious with Spiritfarer, which has such a different perspective. You're helping people reach the afterlife, and it presents everything in a pleasant kind of way, while still dealing with dark themes or hard to grapple with topics. I'm curious if you could just talk more about that, developing a project like that in the gaming industry.
Right, absolutely. I think you're totally right. I mean, death positivity was central to the experience from the get-go. As I said in the beginning, the contrast between the Miyazaki's world and the Greek mythology was an interesting one, because it led to those reflections about what death is actually. From a creative perspective, to me, always felt, as I said, the studio had that very genuine, honest approach, and I was hell-bent on wanting to carrying across and to continue that tradition of trying to take a subject and think about it very carefully and very, deeply, understand what that meant. You're being definitely right again in the video games industry. Maybe not in the industry, but let's say from an entertainment domain perspective, like from a games perspective, death is generally considered an objective. You have to inflict death upon others. Well, not others. You inflict death on NPCs generally, so on pixelated AIs, the people who are your enemies or challenge, and that makes sense. I mean, it's a pretty standard thing to think about from the beginning. You have a challenge, I have an enemy to kill, I kill him or her, and then that was my challenge, and I can complete my quest or whatever. Again, by having developed 5 Assassin's Creed games, I've been stabbing in the neck a very high number of NPCs. May their soul rest in peace. But it's just that, it felt to me that death was, although extremely present in the video games landscape, not really considered carefully. And it actually makes sense. Death is terrible. It's something we do not want to think about. There is a reason why. It's because it's going to happen to all of us, and we just don't want to think about it. It's actually pretty bad when you think about death all the time. Probably there is a Western bias to it. I'm not entirely sure, but I think from other type of civilization, other type of cultures, death is approached differently. We tend to, and I say we as a Western culture, I'm French myself, and I'd say from Western Europe to North America to other types of developed country, we tend to forget about death. Death is away. Death is something else. Death is different. Death is not for us. Death is for someone else. So it always comes as a shock when it actually happens to you, and it does quite often for any individual on Earth. So that was the start of it. I was thinking to myself, we have to talk about that from a a real perspective, like really think about that. And the first step I took and we took as a studio was for me to research the topic. So imagine me watching a very high number of documentaries about people dying, people at the end of their lives, and then I was lucky enough, lucky to have a brother who is in France. He's chief of service in a geriatric care hospital in southern France. Turns out that southern France is a bit like Florida in the US. Tons of old people go there for their retirement period. So lo and behold, in Nice, and there are tons of people in his, service, and it was a very good way for me to document that more. So I went to the hospital. I talked to patients, people there dying. I talked to caregivers there, and it was fascinating. Truthfully, it was extremely interesting. Yeah, from the literary to the documentary to first-hand research. I guess the main takeaway for me was that life was still there. It was not just a grim. It was not felt as a, how to say that, a gloomy place. It was, of course, a bit dramatic. I mean, people were there to die, and many of them were very old, and many of them had a life behind them. But still, what I guess struck me the hardest was the fact that those people were still definitely alive. They still had projects. They still had things they were doing. They were still were going on. They were going on. They were like waking up in the morning and brushing their teeth and, fixing themselves a coffee. So they were doing things actually. And my feeling was that life and death were extremely intertwined in the smallest of moments, because that's what you do there. And when you see the family is going to see their relatives, if they do have some people don't have any family going to visit them, which is a bit sad. But what they do is that they don't, recite epic poems on a cliff before they die. They just go and do their daily things. They will be watching TV, and then they won't. They will be, talking about something, and then they will stop. And that's it. That's so simple. That's so mundane. So scarily normal that I thought that was a good, approach to death positivity, in the sense that yes, you die and it's terrible, but this time it's so simple, so natural, and it was a reminder for me first, and it was tough at first, but then I think we created the characters according to that motto in the game.
And I think maybe on that, what was it like? Because I think one of our questions is like, what is your relationship, or what was your relationship to thinking about death before the game, and maybe how did the game change that? And I'm also kind of curious, like, what it was like for a team of people to kind of be sitting with and thinking about death in this very present daily way, because I think you're right. Western culture as a whole has this very like, death is something that happens over there. We hide it away in hospitals. We do everything we can to make it not a part of our daily lives. And so I'm wondering how you and your team were kind of impacted by every day you're going into work and you're like, let's think about death in this, in the structure of this game.
Oh man, that's such an interesting question. I mean, yes, as I told you, we were facing death. Now, at least I was, because I was in the forefront of it. But so before the game, I am personally an atheist. I don't believe in God, really. I've been, in religious study when I was a kid, but it was never really my thing. I have a very scientific mind, and I need to have proof of things, and I need to observe the world from a scientific point of view. But there are a few things that are a bit not ambiguous, but mysterious and interesting, like the fact that life is a thing and non-life is another thing in the universe. We have those two categories of things, of living things and not living things. So this is a mystery, and then you can also infer that life wants to carry on. The first order of life is to continue being life. So that's also interesting, and there is no answer to this from a scientific perspective. Now, I myself is an atheist, so I don't believe in an afterlife. I don't believe in heaven. I don't believe in hell. I don't believe that my acts in life will amount to some reward or punishment when I die. I don't think there is some form of place where my soul is going to be. Yes, my molecules will be recycled into being organic matter and being a tree or I don't know, a diaper at some point. I don't care really, but it's part of life. Now, before that, I'm a father as well, as I tell you today. And I think since my fatherhood, I'm scared by death way more than before, because I feel now that my life has some form of purpose, that is at the very least take care of a human being that needs me and my wife, but I mean still, they need somebody to take care of them. So death is pretty scary. Now, has Spiritfarer changed anything for me? I don't think so. Maybe. It's hard to say. It's it's just that, I don't know, when the players play Spiritfarer, they will play our own take on it. As I told you, for me, it was those first month of research and, documenting end of life and talking to people at the end of their life was more the impact that was there for me. That was the takeaway was there, and then Spiritfarer is the result of this in a nutshell. But from a team's point of view, we also, one of the first initiative I took was to ask people to talk to me about relatives that had a huge impact on their lives. That was one of the message. Let's say one of the angles of the game, try to make sense of death through the lens of we still have in us people who had an impact on us when they were alive. Would it be genetically, your parents, your grandparents, your lineage in a way? Would it be from a cultural perspective, people in your country, people that had an impact on you? Could be like non-figure actors, characters could have an impact in your life, but also more generally your family, so people around you, uncle, cousins, friends, people who shaped you and made you who you are, the way you talk, the way you think, what you like, your taste in food, how you dress up, but anyway, so yeah, that concept of being molded by people around you was central to the understanding that they might be dead, but they are still with us all the time, and we carry that legacy through time. So that was probably something that say, okay, yeah, I guess I'm feeling a tiny bit better now that I have understood that a bit better. But as I said a few seconds ago, I've asked team members to talk to me about relatives that passed away and who had huge impact on them. And there were tons of very cool story. In the game, there are at least 3 to 4 characters that are shaped after my grandmother, my grandfather, a friend of mine who died when he was 18, another friend that I had who died a bit later. One of the characters is almost directly inspired by one of the artist's grandmother, someone's uncle. Well, almost all the spirits are the result of those interviews I had with team members. And I can tell you the first thing that happened when this meeting started is first people are filled with joy. I'm going to think about that person I loved so much, and then it's going to be great. I can tell you things. And then you think about this, and the very first kicker comes in. Oh, that person is dead. I won't ever get to see him or her again. And then you cry. Like, really, you cry. Wherever you are, whatever you do, you start crying. So it means also that feel of loss, that hole you carry in your heart, is still there. But the funny thing is that the first moment they had, then they remembered about it. So it's always the same pattern, like joy, huge sadness, and oh yeah, but that's right. I am them away. I am a bit of them, so I feel better. It's a kind of a very small, very fragile, warmth in my heart, and I can feel it. So from, I don't know, like I'd say growth perspective, as humans, that was mostly it. We felt it was this way. The character that you encounter in the game, they had that impact on Stella, and then we could infer that Stella was kind of us, and we felt that all those moments were there. I'd say in a way that's also probably what makes the game so bittersweet. I mean, it's both sad and happy at the same time. It's happy because of this. It's happy because you have fun and you make jokes and people are goofy and they will still do silly things. Fun story. I met someone and that guy was an army vet in France. He was pretty old and he was in that hospital, and the first thing he did when I met him was fart. Like, he let a huge fart in the room. It was terrible, like very noisy and very smelly, and it was so cramped. It was like he was laughing his ass off. It was absolutely amazing. And 2 days after that, he was dead. I was like, wow, that's life, man. That guy was like making the rudest joke when I met him, and then he passed away. But I mean, that's also part of it. That's why it's so sad and funny at the same time. It's just life.
Because it is so personal, and I think in some ways you were asking, your teammates and your team members to really get into it with you. I'm wondering what that was like and how, I guess, unique it was to be in a workplace and really asking people to kind of talk about, death and your relationships to people in this way are just so personal.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. It feels like it's a tragedy. It feels like it's heavy to bear, because it's when I talk about this topic, it feels pretty intense. But you have to understand that it happens through the course of many years. Well, at least 3 years for us. So let's doing the long 1 year at the beginning of the project, but still it's a long period of time, so you don't feel that burden that much, because yes, there was an hour of conversation between me and that person, and it was an intense moment. It was a very intense hour, but then 2 hours later we were taking a coffee break in a room and was thinking about something else. So it's, I guess, when you sum this up in such a small amount of time, it feels terrible. But then across a time period, it's much better. And probably it's also something that helps us compose with death. It's that, yes, when we think about it now in the moment, it's that's intense, but then it's diluted in time, and then you think less about it and you forget about those moments. So it's life finds a way to balance itself in your own feelings.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what were some of the kind of audience reactions to the game itself, because I feel like, again, something that is so personal, I think it's so easy for people to kind of see themselves or see their own experience in that. And so I'm wondering if you noticed especially in from the games that you had worked on previously, a stronger reaction or emotional reaction to the game.
It's something, I can tell you this. It's I would never had foreseen this, specifically because of the moment. We'll talk about this, but it's quite many people connected with the game. Well, I believe, at least from the receiving end that we had, I don't know, maybe more than many hundred letters of personal testimonies of how the game affected people. Extremely touching ones, extremely moving. I mean, when I was reading it, it was on the all the time on the verge of tears, because it's so moving. Many people, when they are really moved by the game, it's completely intertwined with their own story. Well, with some character reminds me of my grandfather, grandmother, friend. Myself, I have experienced death or dying of a close, a mother, a wife, a husband. It's extremely moving. So many people see themselves in the game, because of that personal connection, because we actually put our heart out there, and then people saw that, and then they can relate. But also, I guess the most moving to me were the ones who actually, maybe there was a handful of them who told me, I am a nurse, and thanks to Spiritfarer, I understand my work better. And now there was even one letter of someone who wrote to us saying, I had given up on my work. It is a terrible work to do. I mean, those people, honestly, there are real heroes out there, people who actually are holding the hands of dying people. They are heroes, I can tell you that, because they are going through it every day, every month, every year, and it's extremely heavy. For them, it's heavy, I can tell you this. But yeah, so that person was writing to us telling us, I couldn't do it anymore. And then I played Spiritfarer and I got something. I understood that my life had a purpose way more than I did before. And she took back her job as a nurse. And I was like, wow, at least I feel I've done something, we've achieved something as a team.
Yeah, something
was really
something that's really resonating with me in a lot of your answers is, for one, I really appreciate the honesty, especially with Ben's question about like how have you changed since the project, and I think everybody expects when you create something that once it's out you're gonna have, like you said, this dramatic proclamation, I'm a new person, and often it's not that way. I was telling you over the email that Ben and I had a podcast a number of years ago where we did a road trip around the United States, and we were interviewing people about death, belief, and other metaphysical topics. And we were kind of like you, a bit more skeptical, more on like the atheistic bent of things. And people would ask us once we got back from the trip, after we talked to all these people about death, like, how have you changed? And certainly there are experiences that changed my perspective, but it's not in these grand ways. It's always in these kind of smaller ways. And
absolutely.
Thinking about Spiritfarer, I'm curious, it's a management sim. There's like resource gathering, and you're kind of working with these spirits, getting them what they need or what they want in order to help them eventually pass over. And just from a gameplay perspective, I'm curious how you all kind of fell upon those kinds of systems, and what y'all's thinking was in developing the gameplay or flow.
Yeah. Right. So from a gameplay point of view, well, it's again an awesome question. Thank you for asking it. It's to see that blend I think it's crucial to understanding what Spiritfarer is. Again, not me. I joined the project, and as I told you, it was a pitch. But beyond the pitch, there was also a gameplay structure-ish, and that structure was, hey, we want to make a game that is kind of Stardew Valley. I was like, okay, sure, why not? I wasn't entirely sure at first, but then it was kind of making tons of sense, because, as I told you, it is in the simple things. Life is in the simple repetition of chores and mundane activity. And what is more of a chore than actually having to tend to a garden and to farm things? It's the most simple, normal, quiet things you can do. You just like plant the seeds, you water it, you watch it grow. That's it. That's life there. But there is repetition. There are a ton of things that are perceived as chores, which is interesting. Actually, it was kind of a contention point, because many players who tackled Spiritfarer were kind of like, threw off by the fact that, okay, so I have to manage thing in this way. It's kind of boring, isn't it? It's like, no, it's not boring. It's not boring to me. It's not boring to many players out there, but I can definitely understand that it might be boring to some of you guys, because it is not made for everyone to play a game which is slow-paced, in which things take their time to happen. But I couldn't have told, actually, I couldn't have let player experience the game's message, without it. Because you have to do this. You have to repeat things over and over again to get it. That's where life happens in those moments. Now I'm just like paraphrasing myself, but that's where it is. And also, that was one of my takeaways of talking to caregivers in hospitals. They do the same thing all over again every day. They have the same questions. They repeat the same procedures. And fun fact, because they work in places where there are tons of old people who are dying of degenerative disease, most of them will forget what they did, so they will repeat themselves all over again. I guess the only thing that I couldn't, have in the game was people in those services, they talk very loudly, because many elderly people, they do have hear loss and audition loss, so they have to talk very loudly to others, which is interesting, but it's kind of goofy, right? You're talking to someone again that is in a terrible condition, that have a few days to live, and you're shouting in her ear that her lunch is missing salt, and it's okay, madame something, I will bring you salt. So the mundane activity of doing the type of farm sim Spiritfarer was a-okay. It worked perfectly well. I'd say the only thing that was a bit of a surprise for us was how in love we were with the platforming aspect of it. I don't think it fits very well the theme, to be honest. I don't think bouncing around, having a character that zips lines through places, that can double jump, it's not exactly thematically appropriate. But being who we were and having the characters the way they were designed, and our animation team, our team and animation team are awesome artists. They really are very good, in my opinion. I won't say otherwise, of course, but I mean, they really are really good. And when you see these characters, alive and jumping around, it was a natural fit. Now, of course, you can try to retrofit it in the fact that it is an expression of life's joy, and it feels a bit, exuberant because you're bouncing around. It feels bubbly and shiny and nice, which it is to a degree. But from I'd say our audience, that mix was funky, to say the least. To have platforming and management, and then a narrative adventure thrown in it. But it kind of worked, so we did it.
And what I'm hearing you say is that, listen, thematically, the farm sim really works in with this piece about building relationship to some degree, and also just like the way that a lot of kind of managing death, right, can also work. And so I'm wondering, it's interesting that you brought up Stardew Valley, because I think Stardew Valley is like a good comparison point in some ways. That Stardew Valley, I think, has some degree of kind of relationships are part of that. You can kind of get married and build relationships and give people things, which is also kind of part of Spiritfarer. But Spiritfarer, I think, takes that a step further in how you're kind of building relationships and getting to know someone's needs. Can you talk about that? And I guess why it's important to kind of build that piece out for the story you were telling?
Right. So yeah, and actually going to Stardew Valley, I guess we should also pay homage to Harvest Moon, which was the initiator of the actual inspiration for Stardew Valley. Anyway, so the farming simulation in general, from a historical perspective in the video games world. So yeah, Stardew Valley was in there as a concept. There is one thing that works really well in those games as well, is the concept of motivation. When you're a game designer, that's a very important topic for you. You want to keep players engaged, and it's probably one of the most fascinating aspects of the game design, in which we as game designers have to know how the psychology of players work. And too many players, it feels like when I hear players telling me, "Oh yeah, it was so addictive, so I like it." It's like, yeah, because we know why and how to embed those addictive mechanisms in the game. We do this we Thunder Lotus and many other indies and video games in general do it for a good reason, and for let's say entertainment purpose. Some of the games do this from a bit more mercantile point of view, and then they will engage you and they will sell you things, and Anyway, but yeah, it works pretty well for Spiritfarer and for the message, because to me the central mechanics, they had to revolve around care in general. So beyond the farming, that concept of care was central. We tried many combinations of things beyond the farming structure. Each in the game, from a structurally mechanical point of view, you do have stations. For example, you have a sawmill. You have every garden is a station, so you do little mini games in them, because I love mini games and I think mini games are fun anyway. And so you plant things, and then you cut planks, and then you cook things. So all those little stations, they will help you build up resources to give to spirits, and then spirits, they need you to have other things built for them. So all those loops, because that's how we call them, from let's say the lingo talk of the game design world, all those loops of objective, challenge, reward, they work really well, and they are really nice to intertwine into one another. So you always feel compelled to move forward and do something. In a sense, the game asks you something that you don't have yet, but you know how to get it, so you do it, and then you do it. So it's a very interesting way forward. In a way, it's also mimicking how life works, because you want something, and then you set tiny goals. You have goals for the day, you have goals for the week, I don't know, you might have goals for the month, and life goals. So the game is structured the same way. Again, I'd say emulating what life is about.
I almost want to jump in and just ask this question about, I you're kind of talking about this idea of building in, to some degree, like things that are mundane, or things that are, I noticed for me the relationship with Atul, who's the kind of frog uncle character, who's always hungry, and he's always asking you for a kind of new dish to go cook him, and it's always a specific dish, and I often found that I was like, I don't have the ingredients, I have to go find this so I can go cook this for him. Which I think is, great, and is true to relationships, right? That it's true that there's this frustration or mundanity, despite the fact that you might love this person. But you're also talking about, like, well, how do we make this, to some degree, marketable also, and addictive also? And so it's like, I wonder if you can talk about the balance between these mechanics, where it's like you want to give people these real feelings that are sometimes frustrating or sometimes, a little boring, but are also, able to loop people and grab people. And it sounds like there's a maybe a bit of a contradiction there, or a bit of a a pull and tug. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't mean this in a marketing way. I mean, you're right though. I mean, many game designers and many games try to do this from that with that goal in mind. But I don't think it was ours. I mean, it's what I'm telling you is more the fact that game mechanics tend to be designed this way for this reason. My purpose was to find another reason why those game mechanics were designed this way. So yes, there is this. So yeah, I'm happy that people will feel engaged, but it was here to serve a higher purpose, and that purpose was this: to understand how caring about others in the light of them dying made sense. There was a mechanic that we had at first that I tried to have in the game that didn't work, was taking care of them in a more literal way. Like they needed medicine, like they were having a disease, and you need to to give them shots and to give them pills. It just didn't work at all. So we removed that. It was felt like a burden. Also, which is another topic, many games will have these mechanics with a challenge in mind. So if I don't take care of that person will dwindle and they eventually die, which was not something that we could do in Spiritfarer, obviously. I really didn't want the player to feel like it was their own fault Spirit died. It would have been terrible. It would have also been completely contradiction to the message, because it felt like, yes, people die, but it's not your fault at all. You're trying to keep them alive, not to kill them. So it was kind of weird. But yeah, to go back to your initial question, yes, there is that kind of a conflict between making a game that will work towards gamers and having that wholesome satisfaction about taking care of them. But I'd say that yes, we designed that this way mainly because I wanted players to experience what it felt like taking care of people who were dying, and how those people were actually the one helping you staying alive or being who you were. The same went for the hugs, for example. I mean, it felt like you needed to have a physical connection to lift someone's spirit, metaphorically, not like literally. But anyway, so that mechanic was useful, and then we also developed another system which is called a mood system, so to keep people in good mood. But this is more cosmetic than anything. Spirits can be in a very bad mood in the game. At first we had consequences for this, like some events would be blocked, some progression would be stopping, but the players would just not understand them. They would not understand that I have not fed that person, I have not fulfilled his or her quest, and I have not hugged him. Now he's pissed and he didn't want to talk to me. It felt weird. We had something missing in the system, so we kind of removed that. But it's really back and forth between keeping the player engaged, imposing some burden on him or on her to make sure that they feel that chore aspect of taking care of someone else. Some spirits are absolute dicks, if I may say so. I mean, some spirits are terrible. It was kind of weird because the way the game was structured was on the mythological Greek underworld, right? So the way the Greek underworld is made is that you have the Blessed Isles right in the center, and then you have the Elysium fields. Basically, when you're nice in your life, so when you honor the gods properly, you will end up in a nice afterlife. But when you're not a nice person, you will end up in terrible places. You have Phlegethon, the river of death, and then you have Acheron, the river of pain. It's like, no, I don't want to end up there. But anyway, so the world was shaped this way, and the concept was that the first spirits you would meet would be more at ease with the fact that they were dying, and the spirits you will meet at the end of the game, so at the edge of the world, would be more harder to actually understand and to reach. So we kind of kept that, but it wasn't really nimble. We should have changed it. Anyway, but the last spirits you meet in the first version of the game that it was out were kind of tough. I mean, you have Bruce and Mickey, the two thugs. You have Elena, who is basically a very hard teacher. The point was for you to dislike those characters, to understand that yes, you have to take care of them, but they are bad people. They are terrible persons. I didn't want the player to like them, and it was kind of a fail because of the structure. And then you felt like at the end of the game you had all these characters that were extremely annoying, and at the beginning you had the nicest characters. But that being said, I guess it also helps sell the point that death can happen to anyone. And actually, sorry to do a bit of a segue, but I've always considered weird eulogies of people weird. Like when you have someone dying, you have always come across at church or wherever it is to say that person was such a nice person in life, when you know that on the contrary, some people might be terrible persons and they still die. And you go there and say, yeah, he was really nice, when you think that you can count all the terrible things that he did in his life. So it always felt to me natural that you could actually meet people who were dying, and those people in their life might not have, be the best persons. The same thing went for the fact that they all had requests to fulfill, so they all had a story arc of them knowing they were dying and what they were doing in their last moments to reach some kind of, inner peace. Well, long story short, many of them don't. They don't find their inner peace. Some people die in a terrible situation. Some people understand that they're going to die and they're angry. They stay angry up to the moment they die, and they're still angry. So it's not like they have found some inner truth or nirvana state where they feel at peace. No. Some of them die in a terrible way. Well, not terrible, but in a more intense and not peaceful way, which was also a true portrait of death that we wanted to give.
I really loved what you said about eulogies. I was just thinking about it in the context of my grandfather. When he died, my dad gave the kind of speech, and they had a really complicated relationship, and he gave a really complicated speech where he wasn't kind of trying to, paint this person as perfect or all good. And my cousin was kind of talking to me after the fact, and she was like, it almost, when you're kind of putting someone to rest, you're almost better able to do it when you're more honest about kind of who they were, that it's like it completes the story in a better way than letting them go to rest with like a false story about kind of who they were. So I really love what you just said.
Yeah, and to bounce back on this briefly, the going back to the concept of being shaped by someone, you can be shaped negatively by someone. You can have a bad influence on one of you, or you can see something in someone that you don't want to repeat in your life. An example of this is the relationship between Astrid and Giovanni, which are definitely my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather, he cheated on his wife for the better of his life, and she didn't know that. And when she learned about this many years after his death, she just hated his guts. She said, "I don't want to think about that guy anymore, because he cheated on me for all my life and I didn't know. Fuck him." Sorry. So it was kind of weird. And again, that guy, I loved him, my grandfather. He was an awesome dude, but he did very weird things all his life. I mean, he taught me how to. Again, I'm French. We don't have guns in France. Still, he taught me how to shoot with a gun when I was 7. Like, who on his right mind would hand a 7-year-old a gun and say, "Oh, shoot at that thing"? No, not a good idea. Anyway, so yeah, it's going back to the idea that you're shaped by others. You can be shaped by seeing a behavior you think you should avoid yourself in someone else. So it still worked in the metaphor.
Yeah, going back, kind of bouncing off that. We've talked a lot about how Spiritfarer is a very unique game, and I agree. And I think a simple question would be like, how is the gaming industry changed to allow these types of games to exist? I'm curious, what do you find personally you've seen has changed in the industry that is allowing games like Spiritfarer to that are kind of iterating on more classic games like Harvest Moon and things like that to more introspective places? How are you finding or what are you finding is changing in the industry that's allowing these things to happen?
Right. Wow, that's a complex question. It is fascinating though, and okay, so I don't want to sound like someone ungrateful or anything, but I'm getting a bit older now. I'm 41, which is not that old, but still older. And I've been playing, as I guess for many of you guys, for quite many years. Yesterday, actually, or the day before, I was trying to think back of the games I played, because my daughter is 7 now, and she's playing games. And I just became aware that I started playing when I was 2. So it was in 1982, basically, which is a long time ago. And I've always felt like games where, okay, it's going to sound weird, but games were always squarely aimed at accidental males between 14 and 21. That was the window. To me, that's how it felt, and mainly because probably that was an argument that I heard many times in Ubisoft and maybe even in EA about our core audience. At some point in the industry, we even had that weird distinction between casual gamers and hardcore gamers. It was an extremely artificial way of dividing people, but still, I always felt like as an industry, we always thought of that specific target as the golden target, that the people you have to reach. And by doing so, we always, I felt, in a way, restraining ourselves to brush up on more mature topics. Now, many games way before Thunder Lotus and Spiritfarer dabbled on very mature themes or tackle them in a more mature way, but I guess the difference now is that we're just, as developers, getting older. We want to play games that mean something, not just games that are the same iteration of a first-person shooter again. And there are tons of very good games now. I mean, very, very good games that I've played. It's like, wow, this is great. I'm actually playing Disco Elysium. I'm a bit late. Now it's out on console. I love it. It's awesome. It's a fantastical game. There are some weird things, of course, because it's made by a team of like us. I don't know how many they are. I mean, I guess I'd wager less than 20 people doing games that are quite ambitious. But still, they try to do something so fresh, so personal, so interesting, so new in a way. But I mean, it's not entirely new. I mean, it's a, let's say, from a detective story is going on in literature since when, 2 centuries ago. So we're kind of late to the party as an industry. But still, I think there are so many initiatives now that players have probably grown up. I have the different types of audience, way more women playing, which is a blessing, to be honest. I think our diverse cultures, diverse opinions. I was lucky enough to talk with many journalists from many countries for Spiritfarer and people in Turkey, Brazil, playing games, and not just the same people. I love people in Kentucky. I'm about to say Kentucky as an example, but I mean, it's getting diverse and broader and more interesting. So I guess we do have more audience. Also, the fact that games are probably a bit cheaper to produce. I mean, we do have integrated engines now. Spiritfarer has been made with Unity. Unity is simpler stuff to use than a complex engine from beginning of the year 2000, like big Unreal or big, of the types of engines. So it's nimbler, it's easier for people to craft stuff. I don't know if you guys played If Found, which is an awesome game made by Dreamfield company in Ireland, and it's just a very simple thing. It's more of a couple of pictures that it's more exactly a visual novel, and it's so simple, so nice, and it works really well. So my opinion on this, to sum this up, would be that more people are interested into making games that they understand as something they like themselves, and there is a bigger audience for this, and there are more studios now trying to do this. So it's an awesome time to make games, and I'm hoping for a kind of golden age of games going forward, as it went for TV a couple of years ago.
And I want to ask you, because I'd noticed earlier when you were kind of talking about the early stages of Spiritfarer, where you were describing having people play and thinking about your audience in this very clear way about like what are things that we can do to make this an enjoyable experience but also an engaging experience. And I think you're mentioning this here too, though, the idea of who is the audience and how do we expand the idea of what our audience is. And who we're telling stories for. And so maybe you can talk about, how you picture an audience for a game like Spiritfarer and what were the conversations like around that? Obviously, for contrast, you were talking about, a place like Ubisoft having this vision of a kind of young white male playing Assassin's Creed. What was your vision for kind of who an audience was?
Right. So here's the thing. I'd be lying if I said what okay, how to tackle this question. It's complex. As for everything, but okay. So here's the deal. Our approach to game is to make games that we first find interesting, like as a studio, as people, that we find not only interesting from an artistic point of view, not just making games that will bring us money. I mean, of course, we still need to recoup our budget. I mean, we're not doing this for a non-profit organization. We still have to have some form of money being made out of a game. But that being said, we would never ship a game that we don't believe in. Actually, that's what I think. And to believe in it, we have to be our first customers. Now, I talked about art because I think every game isn't trying to be an art form. I personally believe that games are an art form. I'm 100% convinced of it. But to be an art form, you have to say something. You have to make something that you believe into. You have to, as I said, put your heart out there. And many developers are doing it. Now, this is the first step. Now, the $1 million question, or many million depending on your budget, is my thing interesting enough? And if it is interesting, it's interesting to whom? Who is going to be interested in that thing? So there are simple and complicated ways to tackle this. I guess from a more organized industry, you would say we will make focus groups and we will try to have people and nail down the audience. But we didn't really do that because Spiritfarer was made by a team of 15 people, so we couldn't really exactly, have like complex organization of what was interesting to people. But definitely the audience for Spiritfarer was pretty simply the indie games audience. So people who want to play games that are not displaying many millions of dollars of budget on screen and are trying to tackle subjects that are a bit different, so approached in a different way. So I guess to us it was always that concept of having just like, simply put, the indie audience, and that was about it. So it was meant to be more of our PC Steam, and maybe a bit on Switch now because they've been pushing the indie a lot over the years. But now, in hindsight, I'd say that we've hit a more how to say this, an audience that were interested by the wholesomeness of the game, the message. We got a pretty interesting mix. Our community is awesome. It's one of the best communities I've ever worked with. There are very nice people. They are really interesting to talk to. It's absolutely great. But yeah, the wholesomeness, I'd say this, but the way the game is, because of the colors, because of the coziness of the game, attracted a specific crowd as well, and because it had a genuine message, it worked for them as well. So I don't know if we actually started the game with that much of an audience, beyond the fact that we knew that we had to sell the game to an indie audience, and it was enough. I mean, we knew that we could make a game and have the budget we had, and not being entirely broke if we shipped the game with the audience that we thought we could reach, in a way.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe you're saying there's a different balance than what I'm asking. The balance is, how do you find something that has a clear and concrete creative vision, while also still at the end of the day being something that is marketable to some degree?
Yeah, I guess the difference would be many companies do tackle games as if they were products, which they are in a way. I mean, they will do a marketing investigation. They will try to have a business model that works with them, so they will think of the game as a product, and to have a product you need to have customers, basically. And I don't think we do this. We think of games as a concept, a piece, in a way. So something that you believe into yourself, and then you put out there and you hope people will understand it. Of course, it in between we do have that, thinking about it, will the game reach enough people? Will it be okay? Do we have to change the game to reach more people? But at the beginning, it's not about the game being a product, more for an art form, and because you have to express yourself.
Yeah. To kind of switch gears a little bit, one thing that I think is really important, especially when talking to people in the games industry, is that it doesn't seem like there is necessarily the traditional route into it. I feel like everybody we talk to has a very kind of unique kind of gateway into how they got into games. And I'm curious, just for you, what was young Nick like? What was your household like? And then eventually kind of walking us to when you started to getting into the industry, was that something that your family was accepting of, or is that at the time whoa, what the hell are you going to do with that? When
I'm ask that question, I always want to reverse it. And for you, how was it? But yeah, so wow, it's well, I guess I've been fortunate enough to throughout my life, being allowed to play games and to spend a very inordinate amount of time playing them in any form. Growing up, I was more of a tabletop RPG gamer than a video gamer. Because I'm a bit older, and I've always, thought that, I still think that, tabletop RPG are the pinnacle of interactive entertainment. But yeah, so I never knew it was my call in a way. I never knew that I would be doing this in my life. As for many people my age, my family was trying to make me do something that was worth it. So be a doctor, be a lawyer, something like this. As for everyone, be a journalist. I don't know, but have a real job, son. It's like, yeah, okay, I can try to do this. So I tried to have a real job for a long time. I tried to, in France, find my way. I guess I was lucky enough to be quite lazy, so I was bad at it. I would try to do something. I went to university. I didn't perform that well. I was kind of doing okay, but still not that great. And then to me, the most important thing was, and that's going to sound weird, was to leave my family, but to leave them away from where I was. So I changed city. I was born in on the French Riviera in Nice, which is not a bad place to be. I mean, you're on the border of the Mediterranean Sea. It's kind of nice though to be in French Riviera. But still, it felt like, my description was that it felt like an aquarium. It's small. People are always between themselves. They don't get to see the world. So as for many young French person, I moved up to Paris to find a job. And then there, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, was working at Ubisoft, and said, I'd stop what you're doing and try your luck at video games. Like, yes, I'm gonna try to do this because I've been playing all my life, and I've tried things already. It was back in the beginning of the year 2000, so we didn't have access that much to simple prototyping tool. So I did things more on a pen and paper, tabletop RPGs and or board game style of game development. And then I was extremely lucky because I had a lucky encounter with someone called Alain Tascan, who was the founder of EA Montreal in 2004. And we were just hailing from the same city. And then out of sheer luck, we had an encounter and we had meeting and said, yeah, sure, I will hire you. It's like, okay. I was pure luck, like roll a dice, crit, that's it. I was extremely lucky. Many people in my position would have tried to, enter the industry for years and years and years and years. Moreover, in Paris, it's pretty hard. You don't have that many studios. They were not hiring that much. I remember being interviewed by Quantic Dreams back then, a bit Ubisoft, but not that much. So it would have been a much longer road. So I was pretty lucky. But yeah, to go back to your question, I never really knew I would want to do this, but I was completely inhabited by it. I was thinking games. I was buying magazines and playing games anytime I could, and I was trying to avoid going into school to play Final Fantasy VII and Mario Kart. It's not a good strategy, kids. Don't do that.
One of the things we've been asking a lot of the creators that we've talked to is to maybe create a scene with sound, maybe describe it for us. When you think about this game, what is something that's going to stick with you?
About Spiritfarer, you mean? Okay, so the toughest and the most, I'd say, high stakes moment of the game, where all what we call last voyages, basically the moment where the spirits are on that tiny embarkation, and then Stella brings them to the Everdoor, which is where they disappear. So they die, basically. And it was extremely long, and I had to describe this moment to many people as a long and boring sequence. Which was a completely anticlimactic, as it has to be long and boring. Not boring, because it has to be moving, it has to be sweeping, but you couldn't do that with just like the image itself. So kudos to Max LL, our awesome composer, who got it. He completely got it, and he composed an awesome score for the game. But me describing it was like, so you have the bark going and then you only hear the sound of the paddle in the water, and then in the game you have speech. So there's the a bit bitter, but that's the way it is, and that was it. And then you have towards the end that big giant door. It's actually a bridge with a reflection that forms a perfect circle, and then the circle lights up and starts on the top of the bridge to continue in the reflection to give the symbol of the reflection and the afterlife in a way. And then everything I was saying was like, it makes the end.
That was great.
That was terrible. A lot of people was like, man,
that paddle sound was incredibly realistic.
Actually, the voice that was spot on. Because that's exactly what it sounds like. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, you have to make sounds for sound people because they have to understand what you actually mean when you just want to sound. Yeah. So yeah, that was it, and it was. I said it was a mistake because people never believed me. Like, that thing will never work. Sorry, Nick. Fold it right now. It won't work.
Anyway, well, thank you for that. I think we're kind of running out of time, so maybe just out of curiosity, now that the game is out, it's been out a little bit less than a year. How's the team doing? Like, what are y'all up to? Are you kind of iterating on whatever the next thing is, or are you taking a break, or?
Oh man, it's I guess it's weird because we shipped the game in the pandemic, right? So it was something very special. We started shutting down studio in April, and then we shipped in August. And since August, we had quite a couple of months of hoping for the thing to stop and we could go back to studio and work on something else, but it just didn't happen. Right, so we bounced back on believing in the fact that the game was nice enough to be perfected. The game we shipped was okay. I mean, it worked. We still had many bugs to fix, and we still had some more updates to create. We had ideas for characters that we couldn't make it. We couldn't put in the game when it was released. So a very sizable chunk of the team still works in Spiritfarer and is making updates. We've announced updates on the game. So I guess now that it's reaching its rearing its ugly end, the pandemic, we will probably meet back in person at the studio probably in September after the summer, and we'll try something else. We'll do something new that of course I can't talk about because that's how the video games industry work, but it's gonna be another video game.
How about that?
With characters. Yeah.
Shocking
it is. Yeah.
Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. That was an awesome conversation.
Yeah, it was great talking to you.
You too. Thank you.
Well, that was our conversation with Nick Guérin on Spiritfarer and everything else related to Thunder Lotus Games and game development. Man, it was such an interesting conversation, especially just thinking about how they went about like formulating the different narrative beats in the game, and how Nick went to like hospitals, talked to people who are dying, and really does a good job of showing that it is kind of these quieter, smaller moments that are intertwined with life and death, not like these big, grand moments that we might expect in dramatic stories that we're used to.
Yeah, it was. I think such a good interview. I mean, he's just so compelling, and he just does a great job of talking about all this stuff and breaking it down. I was kind of wowed when we got done with this interview. I know that we talked about it, but what an interesting person, and what a great kind of perspective. There is One thing that I couldn't help but notice as I was listening back to this interview, though, Phil, I think I pronounce Spiritfarer a different way every single time I say it. You got Spiritfarer, you got Spiritfarer, you got Spirit. I mean, I don't understand how I did it, but I really pulled it off.
You know, you're just spreading your wings, trying some new things, seeing what sticks. That's life, baby.
That's an embarrassment is what it is.
Well, we want to thank Nick Guérin so much for coming on the show. Again, like, it was such an eye-opening conversation. I think that we both left it feeling so surprised. Not that we thought that it would be a bad conversation or anything, but it just like was one of those conversations where it kind of floored us in ways that we weren't expecting. So yeah, we just really want to thank him for his honesty and candor in talking about the game and his role within it. And he doesn't have any socials that he wants to plug, but you can find more of Nick and his team's work at thunderlotusgames.com.
As always, thank you to Ryan Hopper for the music, Melody Hirsch for the cover art, and thank you, dear listener, for listening. If you're enjoying what you're listening to right now, you know, maybe think about opening your app, dropping some stars, maybe a good review, say some nice things about us, how handsome we are, how nice our voices are.
5 stars, you know, it helps a lot, gets more eyes on the podcast. And, you know, how about you tell a friend? Like, these conversations are interesting. I'm sure people like to listen to interesting conversations. So spread the word.
And if you have to harass a friend, harangue a friend, you know, lock your friend in the apartment and just blast the podcast full tilt.
Yeah,
that's the way.
Yeah, you know, another great tip. You know, you're driving with your friend. You're going on a weekend adventure. You have control over the radio. Like, what are they gonna do? Just pop on Origin Story.
Trapped in that car with just our voices, soothing them.
So where could they find you at, Ben?
They can find me at sad_radio_lad.
That is just the best handle. I gotta say. I feel like I say that every time.
I appreciate it. I'm sad and I work in radio. What do you want?
You can find me at 3D Cisco, and you could find this podcast at originstory_ on Twitter. If you all have any questions, ideas, wants, needs, if you want to tell us like something you'd love to see more of, or, you know, whatever, you can hit us up at our email, theoriginstorypod@gmail.com. We are going to be here again next week with another conversation. Next week, Ben.
Buckle up.
So we will see you all then. Thanks for listening.
Bye.